Today's sermon is titled What Moses Discovered, and the scripture reading that goes along with this sermon is Exodus chapter 3, verses 7 through 12. Many years ago in Korea, some families used silver spoons and chopsticks, literally. Partially owing to this practice, the terms golden spoon and chopsticks, silver spoon and chopsticks, and clay spoon and chopsticks have been recently coined to refer to people's socioeconomic status. Those born into a wealthy family are referred to as having been born with a golden spoon and chopsticks in their mouths, and those from a poor family are referred to as having been born with a clay spoon and chopsticks in their mouths. Let us remember our worth is not determined by what kinds of spoons and chopsticks we were born with. Rather, it is determined by how God sees us. I have seen many Koreans who were born with a golden spoon and chopsticks in their mouths. Many of them have numerous negative personalities and characteristics. They were overly materialistic and greedy. They looked down upon the poor. They often splurged upon physical pleasures. Rarely they spent money for worthwhile purposes. While these people may be at the top of the socioeconomic ladder, they certainly lack the bottom steps of the genuine faith ladder. In today's reading, there was a man who was fed with a golden spoon and chopsticks for the first 40 years of his life, despite having been born with a clay spoon and chopsticks. His name is Moses, one of the most central historical figures in the Bible. He is the epitome of Christian living and teaches us in many ways important lessons. His life is replete with examples of how God leads his chosen people. Moses was born into a Jewish family in Egypt. At the time, the Jews in Egypt were slaves. As they grew exponentially, the Pharaoh felt threatened and ordered a decree to kill all the newborn Jewish male babies. Consequently, his mother set him adrift on a river in a reed basket. While bathing in the river, the Egyptian princess found the floating baby and named him Moses. For the next 40 years, he received fine education and military training in the royal court and was on his way to becoming an influential leader. He lived the first 40 years of his life trusting solely in his skills and abilities. Then his life took a sudden turn when he killed an Egyptian who was beating a Hebrew slave. He had to flee to the Midianite wilderness and live there for the next 40 years, deprived of his royal privileges. As a result, he became a helpless old man without ambition nor confidence. He was now living a defeated life. Moses before turning 40 and Moses after turning 40. We too can find these two Moses in our own lives. There is a time in our life when we take pride in our own strength and abilities. We feel as though nothing were impossible and become puffed up with arrogance. No need for faith, no need for God. Then we experience a humiliating failure. That is when we realize we are utterly powerless and vulnerable. We finally come to terms with who and what we really are. Consequently, we grow desolate, despondent, and pessimistic. Keep in mind, God does not like these negative emotions. At the same time, He does not take pleasure in arrogance and pride. What He wants from us is neither arrogance nor inferiority. Instead, He wants from us optimistic faith, as summarized succinctly by Apostle Paul. I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. This is the right attitude of the faithful. Freedom from arrogance and inferiority. After killing an Egyptian man, arrogant Moses fled to the Midianite wilderness and lived the next 40 years of his life as a humble man. He buried his arrogance, pride, confidence, and narcissism in the Midianite desert. That was how he emptied himself. Exodus 3:1 says, Moses kept the flock. He herded not his own sheep, but his father in law's. In other words, he herded his father in law's sheep and lived under his roof for 40 years. How humiliating it must have been for Moses to be divested of all his royal privileges and live as a shepherd at his father in law's house. Living in such a condition would not have been difficult at all for lifetime shepherds. However, Moses was different. He was an Egyptian prince. One day he went to Mount Horeb with his flock. Horeb is a Hebrew word meaning dry. God appeared to him in the burning bush on Mount Horeb and gave him a special calling to deliver the Israelites from Egypt, as seen in verses 9 through 10. Moses saw a bush in which God was present. What is a bush? It is simply a shrub, neither graceful nor beautiful. God appeared there and gave Moses a special calling. God told him, The cry of my afflicted people have reached heaven. Go and save my people. That was when he came to his senses. He discovered what he had long forgotten. That is what we must discover in our life as well. Today, I would like to discuss each one. First, he discovered suffering people. We must be able to see and notice them. Verses 9 through 10 says, And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. For 40 years, Moses was preoccupied with his personal problems, so much to the point he completely forgot about his suffering people in Egypt. He became so overwhelmed by his own issues that he neglected others. Only when heard from God that the Israelites cried out to him did he shift his focus to his suffering people. He must have felt guilt and shame. The words of his birth mother, who nursed him, suddenly began to resonate in his head. Don't forget that you are a Hebrew. You must care for your people. He remembered what he had long forgotten upon hearing God's message. In life, we often forget what we must be mindful of. How does that happen? By focusing solely on ourselves. As we become overly attached to ourselves, we fail to see others. We fail to see our own church, including our neighbors. We see no one but ourselves. We only see ourselves and our family. We only care about our own children. Imagine what would happen to the world if it was inhabited only with people as such. Upon receiving his calling from God, Moses finally shifted his focus to his people. After 40 years of self-absorption and defeated life, he finally realized he had neglected his rightful duty. deliverance of his suffering people. Neither self absorption nor living a defeated life is advised for believers. God tells us to turn our eyes to our suffering neighbors and extend to them the love of the Lord. Last Monday, I visited a nursing home and was approached by an elderly Korean woman. When she asked me if I was Korean, I said yes. Then she told me that she was visiting from Korea to see her ill sister at the nursing home and needed me to call someone. After complying with her request, I asked her if she needed any further assistance. Apparently, she needed a good listener. I told her about my busy schedule during the day and promised to return that evening. Her ill sister was suffering from Parkinson's disease and already lost control of her bodily movements and speech. She came to America when she was 23 and worked nonstop. Eventually, she amassed a good amount of wealth, but suddenly came down with a debilitating disease. Tears welled up in her eyes as she was telling me about her sister. I shared with her that the most important thing in life is salvation. Then I preached the message of Christ and prayed for them. As I was leaving the nursing home, I once again took a glance at the woman lying motionless on the bed like a corpse and realized, this is the ultimate fate of a self absorbed, greedy, and Christless person. Dearly beloved in Christ, what awaits at the end of self serving life is desolation and destruction. What good is her enormous wealth if she can neither move nor speak? People with Alzheimer's often bring emotional stress to their family members as well as to themselves. However, they do not know due to lack of self awareness. Parkinson's disease is different. The patients may have lost their bodily movements and speech, but have a clear sense of themselves. They are under an enormous amount of stress. Certainly, it is a devastating experience. Here laid a woman who hoarded money all her life without eating out or buying clothes for herself. Now she was bedridden. How wonderful it would have been if she invested even a fraction of her time and effort in the work of the Lord and charity for her needy neighbors. Let all of us shift our focus away from ourselves and focus upon our suffering neighbors and attend to their needs. Second, Moses discovered God, who thoroughly prepared him for his kingdom. Moses had never encountered God. While he heard about God from his birth mother, who nursed him in the royal court, he had never encountered God personally. In Mount Horeb, Moses asked God, "What is your name? What should I say to my people?" God answered, "I am who I am." That means God is a self existent being without a beginning nor end. He is absolutely perfect and complete. He is the ultimate cause of the existence of all things. By today's standards, Moses was a cradle Christian. Cradle, cradle Christians have many strengths. They have inherited the Christian faith from their parents and also have deep roots. It is such a blessing to have one's life formed around the Christian faith. In addition, they eagerly embrace the faith without struggles or anguish. However, they have weaknesses too. As it was with Moses, most cradle Christians cannot rise above conceptual and habitual religious life unless they personally encounter God. They have deep spiritual roots but no strength because their spirituality is mostly cerebral and devoid of experience. Courage is often absent in their spiritual life. They lack assurance and remain emotionally reserved. Without strength nor courage, they remain feeble. These are some of the weaknesses of Cradle Christians. Moses had these weaknesses. Despite having heard time and again from his birth mother about God, he never rose above his abstract insecurity and conceptual faith. Then he encountered God in the burning bush on Mount Horeb. Upon his encounter with God, Moses' faith became functional and practical. He now had strength, confidence, and power. This was a turning point in his life. Let all of us, like Moses, have a personal encounter with God. Unless we have a personal encounter with God, we cannot have a joyful spiritual life. We may attend church service, but we are not moved. We may sing hymns, but we do not really praise God. We grow anxious about the uncertain future. We remain spiritually dry. Moses had all these issues resolved upon his encounter with God. That is how powerful our personal encounter with God is. Therefore, we must have a personal encounter with God. We must encounter Him in the Word and hear His voice. We must also receive answers to our prayers. We must experience almighty and loving God's helping hand. In time, we will remain faithful to Him till death and commit our lives to Him completely. God promises that those who seek Him will find Him. Let all of us encounter God who intervenes in the life of each and every one of us to guide us in the right path. May we be used as His beautiful instruments. Thirdly, Moses discovered himself. He discovered who he really was. When God appeared in the burning bush on Mount Horeb, he saw himself against the fullness of the glory of God. He removed his shoes in the presence of the holy God and saw his ugly, shameful, and deteriorated self. Prior to his encounter with God, he had an elevated view of himself. He was full of pride and arrogance. Now that he saw his true self against God's holiness, he realized how ugly, shameful, and worthless he was. As a result, he lost what little courage he had. He could not even manage to stand before God. This is what happens as we stand before Him. So long as we remain oblivious to who we really are, we grow prideful. The proud do not have a clear sense of who and what they really are. Out of ignorance, they maintain a stubborn attitude and forcefully exert their views upon others. That was what Moses was like in his younger days. He finally realized this and became overwhelmed with shame. Then God told him, "Go to Egypt and save my people." Had this happened 40 years earlier, he would have complied out of arrogance. He would have thought to himself, God finally acknowledges that I've met my credentials as an Egyptian prince and I am a qualified leader. A younger Moses, without hesitation, would have complied with God's request. However, he was different. Having spent 40 years in the wilderness, he had no courage to undertake such a task. Therefore, he declined, saying, I am slow of speech and of slow tongue. Nevertheless, God assured him of his presence and insisted that he go. This is how God uses us. While God never uses the proud, He uses the humble who say, God, I know what and who I am. I'm nothing and can do nothing. The most beautiful are those whom God uses, From God's perspective, physical beauty does not coincide with spiritual beauty. Truly beautiful in God's eyes are those whom God uses, those who live a life committed to God to live out their callings. Nowadays in Korea, even men see the dermatologist regularly for skincare. In fact, many Korean men and women have flawless skin without any wrinkles. Skincare is good, but having your skin resemble marble or ceramic glaze is a little too much, I think. Wrinkles and spots are what makes us look human and down to earth. I am not too keen on flawless skin. I know a lot of people invest in diet too. When I visit Korea, I feel as though I am the only person with belly fat. Preoccupation with physical appearance is not a recent phenomenon. It was the same in the olden days. There is historical evidence that women in ancient China embraced weight loss diet. A certain scholar in the late Ming Dynasty in China wrote that many women strove to lose weight for more beautiful figures. In Yixing, women only deprived themselves dietarily but took weight loss tonic made of 9 herbs. However, they tightened their belts to prevent weight gain. It is said that not a day went by that women's screams were not heard in the city. Some could not even walk without the assistance from their female servants. Some had to wear a heavy pendulum around their neck to prevent from being blown away in the wind. There is a bit of exaggeration, I'm sure. Anyway, this goes to tell us a woman's desire to look beautiful is nothing new. You don't have a slim figure? So what? Koreans are obsessed with ideal body types these days so much that they talk about the S line and six packs. I heard some men have silicone implants for the perfect chest muscles. I do not know why they would go to such great lengths when they do not take their top off or go to beach or go to the swimming pool every day. God could care less if we have belly fat or washboard abs. In Korea, people with belly fat are said to have a D line. Whether D or O line, it does not matter. What determines our beauty is our humble service to God. Therefore, let all of us pursue spiritual beauty rather than physical, secular beauty. Let all of us, like Moses, discover these suffering people, encounter God on an intimate, personal level, and see our humble selves for who and what we really are. May all of us, like Moses, come before God in humility and fulfill our God given callings.